All right, today in the studio, we have a really interesting topic that we're covering, and we have real live meteorologists. Wow, I knew that was going to be a hard one to say. Jeff Orrick, Eric Seymour from the National Weather Service Wakefield, both meteorologists, right?
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for being here. You know, I think everybody's picture of a meteorologist is like the 7-day forecast and, on the evening news.
Hands up.
Yeah, exactly. We got rain coming, all that stuff. There's actually a lot more to this science. Tell me a little bit about what you guys do out at Wakefield. Jeff, we'll start with you.
So we're really behind the scenes. I mean, we're a federal agency, so we work with the federal government. But our job is to really do all the forecasts and warnings and provide the information at the local level. So we do cover a pretty good size area. Chesapeake's almost somewhat in the middle. We go all the way up to Maryland. We go Ocean City. Yeah, we go across to like Fort Hill and like over towards Hanover, Ashland. We have all of Richmond. We go as far west as Farmville. In Louisa and Carr Lake. So if you're going out to Carr Lake, Lake Gadsden, we forecast for those areas down to Elizabeth City. So it ends up being 66 different counties and cities that we have to forecast for. And the other side of that is obviously all the water, because with the rivers, the tributaries, the bay, the ocean. So we do a lot of marine forecasting for all of our marine partners, everything from the Navy to the Coast Guard to the fishermen, the pilots. And then we also get really big into a big issue around here is tidal flooding. So we forecast tides nowadays just like we forecast weather. So we've been really kind of expanding what we do and how much information we provide. So here in Chesapeake, we're forecasting the weather like you see every day, but we're also forecasting the tides and what's happening with the water levels here. So that's one of our big problems around here is tidal flooding. Yeah.
And we'll definitely get into that because that is something here in Chesapeake because we are so low and we are so flat and so close to the water. You mix the tide with rain and all that sort of stuff, and it can spell some issues. Eric, what about you? What is your forte at Wakefield?
I'm the warning coordination meteorologist. So I am the liaison between our guys that are doing the forecast and everything that Jeff was talking about, and then working with the emergency management community, working some with the media as well, trying to be that go-between, answering questions. When we're changing things, when things are new that are coming in, it's my job to make sure that those folks know the new things that are out there, the new techniques, the new tools that are available to try to help, especially with the emergency management community, trying to help them make decisions, things like that. We get to do some things too where we get to play a little bit doing tabletop exercises and stuff like that. So we get to sometimes look at interesting weather cases and apply them in real time and then see what decisions people make, what things we need to communicate. In a lot of cases, it helps us then improve our communication, improve the information that we provide to help people make decisions in a timely fashion.
I think that's a really important piece of this. So the city's emergency management department gets their info from you, the scientists, the experts who are saying this could happen, and then emergency management kind of takes that and runs with whatever the plan may be, right? That's kind of how it works. You guys keep in contact with them.
We do. I mean, our role when you're talking about hurricanes or winter storms or anything like that, the meteorologists are doing the forecast, they're issuing the warnings and everything, but then there's another whole aspect of it now that comes up for us. It's just as important as the forecast. We call it decision support services, but really bottom line what it is us basically working with our key partners, helping them understand what the weather threats are, and sometimes what they aren't, because there's a lot of talk about different things, there's always a lot of hype out there, on social media, this, that, and the other sources. So it's like, what's real, what's not real, what are the real threats, and how bad are those threats going to be, when are they going to occur, and we also start talking about what ifs, say, okay, this is our best guess. I mean, we think it's going to do X, Y, Z. We think, okay, the water level is going to hit 5.5 feet. Maybe there's a chance it could go to 6.5. And so what's the chance that might occur? So we start talking in probabilities, narrowing down the focus as much as we can to help folks know what to expect. And then also talk a little bit in probabilities because we know, tracks of storms can change, things can change, especially that last 24 hours where you have to make maybe some quick adjustments. And so kind of helping our partners stay ahead of that in case there are changes to the forecast that they could adjust quickly.
And if you think about what all of this was like 10, 20 years ago, it was a very different game. You guys have incredible technology now to be able to get pretty darn close to what's actually going to happen. Talk to me about some of that technology that you guys are able to use to make these accurate forecasts.
Well, I think there's a couple different things. We've had a lot of changes with like satellite imagery, things like that have it's gotten used to be a lot of times we would see maybe at best would be a 15-minute between image. Now we have stuff where we can see it minute by minute. So that makes a big difference. So you're able to then take what's actually happening in reality and then take a look at what the models are saying and start comparing apples to apples that way and make adjustments to the models. But the models have gotten a lot better too. They've gotten a lot more detailed. The ability to, as computer technology's changed, it can process so much more data. And then we have, not only do we have, 15, 20 years ago, we had maybe one or two models. Now you're talking, we've got so many more models, and you're able to then start taking those models and actually kind of averaging them all together to start coming up with consensus views and things like that. So you've had so much change in that at that point to be able to get the forecast more exact. And then when you start talking in the near term, you'd look at some of the changes that's happened with radar and things like that, where we're able to, we're almost to the point where we can almost, a lot of times we can see now, like if a tornado is on the ground, we actually have the ability to actually see some of the, I wouldn't say damage, but some of the, grass and things like that, that get debris that gets pulled up into the storm. We can see that now. So it's made a difference in that respect as well. So you've got a lot of those, new tools now for us to work with, and it's helped us get the forecast a lot more accurate.
It's helped our partners too. I mean, I go back to 20, 25 years ago, Floyd and other storms, even getting into a little bit of Isabel. The accuracy was good. It's not like it is today. And so now, when a lot of times we're 3 days out, from a storm, there's pretty good confidence. You may not know every single detail, but there's pretty good confidence on how it's going to unfold, what the impacts are going to be, the general impact areas, even with hurricanes. I mean, 3 days out, there's still error, but I mean, you're pretty narrowed in, I mean, from a preparedness perspective. So we're definitely able to communicate, I think, with a lot more confidence. And we're seeing our partners, emergency management, state, local level, even federal level, they push decision timelines further out because they kind of have to, because the population increases. So that's kind of forced issues. There's no way of getting out of here without going across a bridge, pretty much. So, and everybody from North Carolina is coming this way, in a hurricane situation, evacuating. So they're either coming here or they're going down towards Rocky Mount. So, we're having to make decisions further out in time, but the accuracy further out in time is improving. So we're able to communicate with more confidence. And again, we talked about probabilities. So with all the models that Eric talked about, we are definitely able to say, okay, this is what we expect. Let's say, 50 mile an hour wind. What's the chance it might go to 75 mile an hour wind? If we're talking about sheltering, what's the chance the winds may go over 110 mile per hour wind and maybe start to threaten some of the school shelters. So, we can definitely have more educated conversations and provide a lot more information now than we used to.
I think you touched on a really good point there about the education. Like, you guys have the forecast, you have the science that goes behind it, but there's also that helping the community understand what that means for them. And, the probability is a huge piece of it. And to be able to convince the community of why they should take a certain action, knowing full well that, the storm could totally turn the other way and nobody, could be prepared for that. But I think that's a really interesting and really important piece of it. Let's talk a little bit about the confusing parts. There's every different kind of watch and warning. You got a hurricane watch and warning, a storm surge, flooding, and then having to educate folks on the difference between a watch and a warning, and what do folks need to be paying attention to? What do they need to be honed in on, and what do we need to help them understand about this stuff?
The first thing we talk about hurricanes, especially, first thing a homeowner, anybody down here should do is assess their threats. So, what are your threats, right where you live, at your house? Are there large trees nearby? So, are falling trees going to be a problem? I mean, you look at the different tornadoes that have come through here. I mean, you have pines and oaks that are huge, that are coming through houses as if they're just, sticks of butter and a knife going right through it. So that's a huge threat. We lose people from falling trees just about every time a tropical system comes through here. They're falling into people's houses, they're being crushed, injured. So that's, what's the threat there? What's the threat from flooding? I mean, a lot of areas around here are low. So if it rains real heavy and there's a lot of ponding around your house or on the roads, I mean, imagine what 20 inches of rain might do. And all of a sudden water's in your house now. Not only that, maybe it's the way you're going to evacuate. If you wait too late and all of a sudden you've had 8 inches, 10 inches of rain and now the roads are flooded, you can't leave even if you want to. So you got to assess that, think about that. And then also the tide aspect of it. If we get into just a good, king tide, high tide, and the water's close to your house or we have what's called minor flooding events. The tides are kind of coming up, or maybe the road that again you're trying to exit out on or evacuate, that water's coming up to the edge of that. And if we start getting some good storm surge, that's all going to be flooded. So assess your threats. I think that's the first thing. And then when you get to the hurricane watches and warnings, hurricane watch is just that's put up about 48 hours before the storm's going to get here, and they push the timeline out. As accuracies increase, they push that out farther and farther. So it's more of a heads up that say, hey, you got about maybe 2 days, 48 hours before this hurricane's going to get up here. You get the hurricane warning at about 24 hours, maybe 36 hours. They say, okay, now you're within the 24-hour window. So that's really definitely getting into that go, no-go phase. I mean, if you're going to go, you're going to evacuate, when the hurricane warning is out, that's when you really need to be kind of finalizing things, because you don't have too long before those hurricane conditions are going to arrive. So the difference between a watch and a warning in a hurricane situation, and even in a winter storm, it's really just more of a how long before it gets here. How long before it? So it's about 48 hours, a little bit more than that nowadays for the watch, and you get in the warning, and it's usually within about 24 to 36 hours. We're narrowing it down, and we're also saying it's much more likely. You say, okay, look, confidence is increasing, and now the event's getting closer. You need to start finalizing what you're doing, getting ready, and either hunker down and shelter in place, depending on the conditions, and if you can ride it out, or go ahead and evacuate.
So it sounds like you really need to have that planning in place when the sky's blue, so you know what you're going to do. And then when the warning comes out, that's kind of when, okay, I'm looking at my plan and now it's time to take action. Okay. We talk a lot about flooding here in Chesapeake. It is not uncommon. There's a lot of different kinds of flooding, though. Can we talk about the different types of flooding that we tend to see?
Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at flooding, okay, we're looking at, could be flooding from heavy rainfall. So could be flash flooding. One of your problems in the urban areas is, you've got a lot of concrete. You don't have the surface that allows water. It's an impervious surface at that point, so water's not being absorbed into the ground. So you have a natural conduit for water to start to stand to build up. So that's one of the things you're dealing with. When you get a little bit further out into the countryside, and City Chesapeake's got a lot of areas that are like that. You've got areas that can absorb, but you also have a lot of creeks and things like that, bodies of water. So as that water builds up in those creeks, eventually there's not enough room to hold it. So then the water starts, kind of coming up, spreading into farmland, on roads, things like that. So in that case, maybe it's not necessarily flash flooding. We'll issue what we just call a flood warning at that point. But you still have water that's coming up, standing, can be a hazard for people driving into, things of that nature. So so the flash flooding is a lot more of a water, a rapid rise coming in. It's moving usually it's got some flow to it. You only need about 6 inches of water, somebody trying to walk through it, and you can knock somebody off their feet if it's flowing. So it doesn't take a lot. 1.5 feet will pick a car up.
Wow.
Okay, so so you're dealing with that. But then the other thing you got to deal with down here is we'd have to deal with coastal flooding. Coastal flooding tends usually to run an hour or two either side of high tide, unless you're dealing with a big time surge with like a tropical system or something. Then the timing can be different. But typically, if we're dealing with the tidal flooding, it's it's in that couple hours either side of high tide. Water comes in as the tide comes up. We'll get it into roadways. Sometimes if it's we've had a couple bigger ones where it's gotten into structures and things like that. So we start getting into moderate or to major tidal flooding, we can get it into structures too. So you're dealing with all of that. And sometimes if you've got a storm where you're getting rain and the surge, now you're doubling up. So conditions can be magnified. So, but that's the different flood aspects that, that we deal with down in the tidewater.
So what's happening with tidal flooding where, you guys are sort of predicting the timing of the high tide. Why isn't it always the same? Why are there sometimes tides that are so high that it's going to flood the road in certain spots?
Well, sometimes you're dealing with, is water being, are we getting an easterly wind where we're building water up in the bay and water's getting pushed further inland? And that's usually where you deal with your tidal flooding. And the thing is, it doesn't always maximize with your high tide because, sometimes you're dealing with, if that maximum surge is coming in when the tide's low, sometimes we don't even necessarily realize that we're dealing with coastal flooding. We can see a surge of 1 to 2 feet, but if it's at low tide, a lot of times it's not a factor. Now, if it maximizes where that max surge comes in at the high tide level, then the threat can be significantly different. So, and that's one of the things when we're dealing with a tropical system that's sometimes hard. I know I was thinking back to Dorian. We were forecasting, probably, close to 6.5, 7 feet at Sewell's Point, because that's one of the tide gauges that's close to the area. And we're like, okay, if we get that, we're starting to push up toward major flooding. Well, as it turned out, it would actually only got to a little over 6 feet. And part of that was just because the timing came in about 3 or 4 hours earlier. So instead of maximizing with that high tide cycle, it came in more toward the low tides, the bottom of the low tide cycle. So we didn't see as much or as worse as it could have been. So those are some of the factors that you're trying to deal with when you're trying to forecast the tidal surge and the coastal flooding.
And sometimes that's the difference between hurricanes and nor'easters. Your hurricane, like Isabel, like Dorian, they're moving along pretty good, and they kind of come and they go usually. So when they do that, usually you're only impacting one tide cycle. So sometimes you can get lucky, comes in at low tide. Sometimes you get unlucky, everything hits high tide, and now water's everywhere.
Could be a matter of hours.
Right. Nor'easters can be a little different. I mean, a lot of folks have been here for a while. The 2009 was one of the ones that we all remember, a benchmark year. And those are much bigger systems. They can hang around the coast much longer. And so because of that, sometimes our more long duration tidal flooding, and sometimes even some of the 2009 is actually right behind Isabel in some locations around here. So, and that was a nor'easter. It was a combination of a nor'easter and a tropical system, but it lasted for 5 days. And so it was just constant tidal flooding, and every tide just kept building. And so that's why sometimes a lot of folks think of nor'easters as being some of the most long duration impact for tides, because it can just be going on for days. Where a hurricane, usually you get that one and done. Maybe you get 2 tides and then it's out, but it's not days on end, and you can kind of start to recover pretty quickly. Where nor'easter can go on for days, and the tides can start to get really, really troublesome, because what happens now is you got parts of the city and the county that remain pseudo inaccessible for a length of time, because the tides just aren't really going back down. And then if you get the tides coming up, water coming up from the ocean, and rain coming down, the two butt heads, and then now you start to just turn the whole place into a lake. And so that's, our sayings are always, run from the water. That, if your house is a good place to take shelter from wind, we're talking about maybe 75-mile-an-hour Category 1 winds. Treat it like a tornado, hunker down. If there's no trees that can hit your house, it's a well-built house. Not talking about trailers here or things like that. Your house, you ride it out like a tornado when the wind starts to blow. But you cannot run from the water. There's no place to hide in your house if the water comes up. And that's when you see pictures of people on their rooftops and cutting holes in their attic trying to get out, because you cannot hide in your house from water. So we say, look, if it's a flood threat, and we're talking about really major flooding, and you have any risk from flooding, get out. It doesn't matter if you're in a 100-year floodplain or not. I mean, we start talking about some of these big events, and you're talking about flooding in areas where we've never experienced it before. Like during Hurricane Floyd, Isabel. I mean, there was places that flooded. I mean, that people said they'd never seen water before. I mean, because you had 20 inches of rain, plus. I mean, over almost 2 feet of rain, and some of those cases was combined with surge. And I mean, you just couldn't get away from the water. It was impossible. So if you were there, you were in trouble.
Yeah. Now, is there a difference between storm surge and tidal flooding, or are those the same?
They're really the same. Yeah. So that's the problem with us meteorologists. So we call it coastal flooding, tidal flooding, surge. And so really, when we're forecasting the tides, we actually try to avoid all that, really. And when we're talking to like emergency managers, we just tell them total water. So we kind of now refer to it as total water level. So your total water level, you heard Eric mention an elevation. So we'll say your total water level is going to be 6.5 feet. And that's major flooding. And then we have inundation maps that show what the reach of that water will be. How far inland is it going to go? So it does get confusing, because there are a lot of terms that are used, and there's a lot of different components to the tide, because you have the moon, the lunar cycle, you have what we call the surge, which is the departure, how much above the normal. So we really have kind of shifted, and now we just talk about what's the total water level? What is the water level you're going to experience? Because it is confusing.
Yeah, I like that as a layperson, and I feel like that's something that I can look into to say, okay, if they are forecasting, X feet of water, I know that could come up to this pot in my house, so I have to take that kind of action. Let's talk about some of the ways that I can learn about that. There's a lot of zones that we talk about. There's a lot of maps that we're sending people to. Can you talk a little bit about what people really need to be looking at as far as the zones and maps and what they need to be worried about? Because we've got a bunch of them.
Right. Well, I mean, you've got to know your zone maps. So if there's going to be any kind of an evacuation or thing like ordered like that, they're going to do it, the state's going to do it based upon that know your zone map. So whether you're in zone A, B, C, or D. So, and that's readily available to go look at. One of the things that Jeff was talking about was the inundation mapping piece. And that's one of the things that the Weather Service is getting more and more involved with, because what we're looking at on our website is we've actually got maps that show where your water level would be based upon minor, moderate, and major flooding. So it's giving you not necessarily the depth of the water, but it's giving you the reach, where the water, how far the water could go. And I think when you're able to do that and paint a picture for people, and they can look down and say, hey, at this level, my house is going to be surrounded by water, that's usually a much easier way to get them to take action, because they can see it. Whereas if I go and say, hey, the water level of the gauge is going to get to 5.5 feet, most people are going to be like, I have no idea what that means. So being able to visually see where the water is going to go really does make a difference, and help with the messaging of really encouraging people, hey, you don't want to be here when this comes in, so let's get out now, get to someplace safe, let the storm go by, and then we come back in. So that inundation mapping piece is really going to be one of those critical, I think, tools that we're developing. We have a little bit, but I think we're going to be developing more to kind of help with that messaging.
Great. Going back to the Know Your Zone map, so yeah, it's the state website, Know Your Zone. You can go look at your address. Now the way those were created, it's dependent upon the storm track, the storm intensity. So it's using the same surge models. We call them surge models. Actually, some are confusing things, but it's the same surge models that we use when we're trying to figure out, okay, well, what does a Category 1 hurricane look like in Chesapeake? What is a Category 2, 3, 4? And then you can also change the storm's approach. Every storm is different. That's one thing residents really have to understand here, is that it's all about how the storm hits us. We can get grazed by a storm, not such a big deal. Take the same storm and change its path maybe 90 degrees, and it's a whole different show. I mean, it's completely different impact. So especially with storm surge. So the Know Your Zone maps were created based on all these different tracks and different intensities. So depending on how the hurricane's approaching us, the intensity of it, how it's moving, that will determine the areas that flood. And the Know Your Zone's tied into that. So if the state's looking at a storm coming out from the southeast and approaching us from, let's say, Hatteras, coming right up the Outer Banks, Category 2. Basically, they look at it, it goes out to like probably zone B, maybe even zone C, and that's based on that approach. So those zones, there's a lot of thought that went into the Know Your Zone, and that's why sometimes they look a little odd, but it's because they're following kind of the contour and neighborhoods and things like that. But they are based actually on the inundation that we expect from different size hurricanes hitting us from different angles, because angle of attack is a big deal here, how it hits us. That's going to be night and day. And so there's a lot of thought that goes into the Know Your Zone maps, and there's a lot of background science to help build those evacuation zones.
So I have to imagine, we're talking a matter of hours can make a massive difference when it comes to tidal flooding. Probably a matter of hours as to whether or not, we're going to get hit with this side of the hurricane or that side. So while our technology has gotten really, really impressive, it sounds like no matter what, we've got to start preparing now, because it could always change. Things could always change. And I'm sure a lot of people have gotten very comfortable. We've, knock wood, been very lucky over the past few years. So let's talk a little bit about preparation. What are some of your tips for people in the Chesapeake community, what they need to be doing now and how they need to prepare themselves for whatever could come?
Well, one of the things is, people need to be thinking about, deciding whether to go, whether to stay. So if you are going, you need to be thinking about what you're going to be taking with you. Everybody's got important papers, things like that, valuable things. You need to make sure that you've got a way to protect those things if you're, either take them with you or you've got a safe place to leave them, things of that nature. If you are staying, okay, then you got to start thinking about, not only surviving the event itself, but then you've got to be thinking about, what am I going to be doing the next week after this? Because a lot of times when we get hit with these kind of storms, it takes the power company some time to get back out and get you power back on. So you may not have power for several days. Maybe you have enough fuel with a generator to go for a couple days, things like that. But you got to be thinking about how I'm going to survive. Do I have enough drinking water? Do I have enough, food? And, I can't just rely on, what I have in the freezer, because if I don't have power and I can't cook it, guess what? That food's not really something that you're going to be able to use. So you got to be thinking about all these different kind of things, different scenarios. If I'm leaving, making sure I've got my car fueled up well in advance, because the last thing you want to do when everybody else is trying to leave is saying, let me go get gas, because a lot of times it's hard to do that. Some of the other things you got to be thinking about is how do I safeguard my house? How do I, do I have the supplies if I've got to board up windows and things of that nature? So you got to be thinking about all those things in advance now to kind of have those supplies ready, because you don't want to have to try to be rushing to the store at the last minute, after a watch has been issued, to say, oh yeah, now I got to do my preparation work. You got to have all that stuff planned out in advance.
Yeah, it's easy to have a kit. I mean, just go ahead and have some food, extra food on hand. Gallon jugs of water. I mean, you really want to try to be as self-sufficient as possible for about 5 days, 5 to 7 days. I mean, where you could actually just, if you have to live in your house with no power, no running water, you and your family can do it. I mean, and if you can get to that point, you'll be in a pretty good spot. Say, okay, I got tarps. If I need to throw tarps over the roof, because when the event first happens, if it's a really bad hurricane, I tell folks, no one's coming. I mean, everybody's damaged. You have to be self-sufficient. If you require medication that has to be refrigerated, that could be a real big problem. I mean, you see these huge long lines for ice, like 2 days after a hurricane hits, and it's just like people have to have ice to keep stuff cold, and it's like it may or may not be there. And how easy is it to even move around, from point A to point B? Because look at all the trees around here. Mm-hmm. You can imagine all these trees start coming down. It really limits mobility. The city's going to get the thoroughfares opened up, but it's going to take time. And getting around is going to be tough and even dangerous, initially. So really being able to be on your own for 5 to 7 days, and think about what that looks like, as far as, food that you don't have to cook. I mean, maybe you do have a gas grill, maybe you can rely on that, but a lot of canned food and bottled water. Making sure, I lived in a hurricane zone for a long time in eastern North Carolina. So every summer we'd go around and take pictures of everything. We took pictures of every room. We took pictures around the house so that if we had to go to the insurance company, we had pictures. But back then it was all just printed out. Now you can put it in the cloud, and get hold of it.
Sure.
But we would document, because we went through a few hurricanes, and after the first one we were like, if something had happened, we couldn't really prove, what.
Right.
So we documented stuff, made sure we had board papers there.
Let's talk about insurance, because that's always a big topic. Some people in Chesapeake are required through their mortgage company to have hazard insurance, but a lot of people aren't. Should we all in Chesapeake be getting flood insurance?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just about any place can flood. You know, and that's the tricky thing. Being down here, we think about the 100-year floodplain, and you get a lot of your requirements for flood insurance, and it happens. And rainfall starts to come in, it gets in through the walls. You start to get water damage. It starts coming into the crawl space and things like that because it rained, 20 inches. But then you also have wind damage. Maybe you also had damage to your roof, and time and time again, even down here in Chesapeake, in storms in the last 10, 20 years, it does start to become a battle. Was it wind damage or was it water damage? And that can be, you have to work with the insurance companies, and that becomes, it becomes a real tough thing for homeowners. And we get a lot of calls, wanting to know X, Y, Z, what was the wind, but then I have water damage, and they're saying, well, it's flood damage, and I don't have flood policy. So it's a horrible experience. And I can't tell you how many homeowners I've talked to that have been very distraught because they had water damage, but also wind damage. But because they didn't have flood insurance, they were really in trouble. Mm-hmm. The other thing that catches folks off guard is that a lot of policies have been rewritten such that if there is either a named storm or a hurricane watch in effect, instead of the deductible being a flat rate, let's say your deductible is normally, let's say $5,000. We'll just pick a number. And so if you have something happen, tree falls on the house tomorrow, your deductible is $5,000. If it's a hurricane and 4 trees fall on your house, your deductible is now likely 1% of the home's value. And so your deductible goes up dramatically. And so just make sure you know your policy, read your policy. It's also true for boats. I don't know if it's so much for cars, but I know for boats and homes, the policies have been, because the insurance companies have taken such hits, going back to Katrina and all these other storms that hit Florida. And so there's been a lot of claims. And so they've had to change how they write the policy. So just be educated, because we've had folks call us there too saying, well, were we in a hurricane watch or warning? Were we not? Because it gravely impacted how the insurance was going to pay out as far as the deductible goes. And all of a sudden, you're talking about a large percent of the house that you have to come up with for value versus just a flat rate. So just make sure you know your policy, boats and homes especially. I don't see this so much with vehicles, but definitely with homes and boats.
So again, with that pre-planning, that educating yourself, that calling the experts when the sun is shining, and maybe even printing the document out and putting it in a plastic sheet in your kit, or like the cloud, like you said. We're so lucky these days. We have so many options, but having that information ahead of time, because just the same with the line at the gas station, the insurance company is going to have their phone ringing off the hook when this stuff hits. So important to have that ahead of time. Eric, talk to me about Skywarn. What is it, and how can people be involved?
Skywarn is an education program, and what we do is we go out into the communities, and we'll usually work with the emergency management community to kind of set up these classes. And what we're doing is actually educating people on what severe weather is, because there's a lot of misconceptions as far as what actually is severe and things like that. We get a lot of phone calls where somebody will say, I've had really bad lightning, the storm's got to be severe. And actually, that's not one of the criteria for it. So part of this program is designed to really help give people understanding what actually, from a weather perspective, what is severe. So if we're talking, severe thunderstorms, we're looking at, hail greater than 1 inch, wind greater than 58 miles an hour. And then, so we're educating people on that. We're educating people on what the difference is between a watch and a warning. So many people misconstrue that. They get them confused, things like that. Whereas a watch is just, hey, the ingredients are ready for an event to possibly happen. So you need to kind of have your, you kind of need to be in tune with what's going on and maybe prepared, ready to act. And then when we issue the warning's like, hey, the ingredients have all come together and we're ready, and you got to be prepared. It's time to take action now. So one of the slides that we actually have in the presentation to help with that is, it talks about, like when you're making a taco, you have all the different parts to it, your cheese, your meat, your vegetables, tomatoes, all that stuff. Everything's kind of in its own little container. You've got it all there. You're ready to make the taco. That's the watch face. The ingredients are there. And then when you put it all together to actually get ready to eat the taco, that's when the warning is. So that's kind of an easy way for folks to remember it. So, so those are some of the things we're trying to go through, and we're trying to, teach people some of the, when you're looking at the sky, what some of the different, cloud things you may see in that would be indicative of a severe storm and things of that nature. So, that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate folks so that they know the difference on these different topics, so that they can make good decisions. And if they see it, what do I do once I see it? So, we also have a section where we talk about how to report that information, how to call your local weather service office, and let them know what, hey, I'm seeing this, especially if we're dealing with things like tornadoes and things like that. What are the things that is a difference between maybe just a cloud that's in the sky in the distance that looks like it could be a tornado, or one that actually is. So that's what we're doing with that education program. And we encourage folks to come in. It takes about an hour and a half to sit down and talk with us and go through the education. So
that's so cool. And I think the running theme for this whole conversation is, you guys take care of the science and the real numbers and figures behind it, but there's so much work to be done in the education piece. So people need to be paying attention, need to be signing up for those alerts. We've got Chesapeake Alert here in the city, and you can sign up to get alerts from you guys. So, the big question I feel like everybody always asks you is what's going to happen this year? Can you predict the future for us? What's the season going to look like? Do we know?
It's funny. I always say we're in prediction, not production. But for this season, given what's going on, you hear about El Nino and La Nina and all that kind of science stuff. But we are going into a pretty significant El Nino, which basically means the Pacific Ocean is going through a warm temperature anomaly, and that does affect the weather pattern. Typically, that means usually we do see reduced hurricane activity in the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. It's not a slam dunk, but if you're a betting person, usually there's reduced activity in the Atlantic. So I think you're going to start to see forecasts coming out of maybe just normal to maybe slightly below normal activity in the Atlantic. We're in a unique position here in Chesapeake, Southeast Virginia. There's some places that you really can't hang your hat on these outlooks. Eastern North Carolina, Southeast Virginia, South Florida, New Orleans. These are hot areas for hurricanes. They just are. More hurricanes pass within 100 miles of Cape Hatteras than just about any other location. Same thing with South Florida, and then over towards New Orleans. So those are 3 big bullseyes where these hurricanes, that's just where they typically go. That's why most of us have been around here for some time, have experienced them, whether it was Isabel or going back to Floyd. We've had a few other grays just like Irene. They come around with some regularity, and it's just a matter of time before we get another one. So even when we say it could be, basically a quieter year or below normal, it really doesn't mean a whole lot for us, just because we are so vulnerable here, so much population right at the coast. There's been years, Hurricane Agnes, that's going way back 1972, but it was the worst flood in Central Virginia's history, and that was a quiet hurricane year. That was another El Nino year. South Florida got devastated by Hurricane Andrew in 1992.
Right.
Very quiet year. It was September, and that was the A storm.
You could have one storm.
Right, it was one storm.
And if that hits your home, doesn't matter how busy
so
the
I hate to
season's
say it,
been.
but now it almost starts like playing Russian roulette. You know, and it's like it's going to be it's in there. And it's just a matter how many are in there, and if you get hit with the wrong one, it's going to be in big trouble. So we are vulnerable with this much population, this close to the coast. The fact that you do have the Gulf Stream sitting right off of Cape Hatteras, that really helps play a role for keeping these hurricanes fairly intense. And a lot of times we'll see them intensify sometimes as they get up here and they get into that Gulf Stream and they get into that nice sweet spot of hot water. We've seen them actually intensify, even right before landfall. So we're just so close to that. And one thing that does bother me, you're glad the big ones don't come very often, because you just don't want it. But you go back to the worst storm in our history, it's 1933, and so we're really to the point where no one really has any recollection or really any concept of what our worst case storm really is, because it has been so long ago, and New Orleans had their Katrina, and nobody there to experience anything like that. We all knew it was going to happen one day. Everybody knew that was coming. Same thing with South Florida and Andrew. Charleston had Hurricane Hugo in '89. Everybody's got their worst case, their nightmare scenarios. Hurricane Sandy, worst case scenario tornado, that could have been us. That was, it button hooked around Virginia, curved out to sea, and then came back into Jersey. And so, that could be us. And something like that, a storm riding up the Outer Banks, maybe staying just offshore, going up through Nag's Head as a Cat 3, and then just coming right in the mouth of the bay. That's our worst case scenario. It has happened. It's happened a couple times in the past. We just haven't been.
We haven't seen it.
Yeah, we haven't seen it because it's been so long. But it will happen again. Eventually we've had a couple close calls. Florence was the last one where, we knew it was going to turn, but it was on a perfect track. It was on a perfect track up. But there's great confidence it was going to get to Cape Lookout, North Carolina, and just hang almost a 90-degree left turn. And that's exactly what it did. But you take that storm, and instead of turning it left and just keep it on coming up north, that would have been one of our nightmare scenarios. But unfortunately, fortunately for North Carolina, it went straight west, across Crystal Coast, and we dodged a bullet.
Yeah, and also the idea that we're only talking about hurricanes now. Tropical storms can make a big impact. You talk about nor'easters can make just a random thunderstorm on a summer afternoon can cause some damage. So we just kind of got to be alert, aware. It's time to educate ourselves, prepare ahead of time. Jeff, Eric, did we miss anything? Is there anything else that we need to jump into?
It's time to prepare. Just think about your supplies. To think about where you're going to evacuate. When it does come to evacuations, it's not automatically go to Richmond. So realize that. So if it's a recurving storm and we're just going to get grazed by it and it's going out to sea, you go to Richmond, that'd be fine, But if a storm's if it's hitting us and then going to Richmond, don't go to Richmond.
Right.
Because Richmond, they have just as much problem with flooding and wind as we do. So think about that. Sometimes the best evacuation route may be going out 58, going out towards Greensboro, North Carolina, maybe going down towards Raleigh. So just think about where you'll go. And if you're going to go, make sure you kind of go early. Beat the rush out. Make sure you have a place to stay. Let folks know where you're going to go, but just plan ahead. Plan ahead. Have your supplies. Think about what you're going to do. Talk about it with your family. If you're going to stay, your house needs to be like a lifeboat. Be able to live in that thing. And so, just if you think about it, plan ahead logically. You'll be in a much better place. And then listen to the officials because they're going to tell you, are Zone A, Zone B? Should you go? Should you stay? And that's all based off of what we're predicting with the water level and how y'all are tying it in.
Great. Jeff Orrick, Eric Seymour with the National Weather Service. Thank you guys so much for all of this education. We're going to point people to the right links, and we're going to hope that people educate themselves. Thank you so much.
Thanks.